Good job.
Thanks. Good afternoon. Welcome to Senate Education, Tuesday, February 7th, 1:31 in the afternoon. We're going to start our day off by returning to a review of the administration's school safety bill and hear testimony. I'm going to talk to the McClure Foundation about their commitment to CCV, continue some of our conversations around education financing, community schools, technical education, Senator Chittenden's bill on kindergarten enrollment age, and then some follow-up conversation around from VSAC. Ms. St. James, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
You as well.
And if you wouldn't mind just bringing us back to what this bill is doing, as well as talk a little bit about the edits before we turn things over to Jeff, Jay, and Sue.
Sure. Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. You should have, up on the screen, eventually you'll have in front of you and posted to your website is what's been labeled as draft 2.1 with yesterday's date of February 6th. This is the committee's bill on school safety, and the substance of it in the body of the bill is the language provided by the Agency of Education. The top of the bill here in the statement of purpose lines 4 through 12 is essentially a kind of straightforward summary of what the bill proposes to do, and there was some feedback provided that it was not as accurate as it could be. So the language you see highlighted are the changes between the statement of purpose and the from draft 1.1 and the draft 2.1. They really surround what independent schools are required to do. The original statement of purpose in the highlighted language indicated that the independent school is required to develop a policy on the action contemplated, and this new language you'll see there on line 6 is very specific to the independent school is required to conduct a biannual option-based response drill following the template developed by the Vermont School Safety Center. That's language taken directly out of the bill. And then line 10, item 5, is that independent schools are asked to adopt an access control and visitor management procedure, not policy. And then the rest of the bill remains unchanged.
I just take the bill for now. Thank you. I'm going to pass this around. We can wait on. Oh, this is the.
That's all of it.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Thank you. Great. So, any questions on what Ms. St. James just ran through with regard to edits before we move into testimony? Senator Gulick, anything?
No.
Okay. Okay. I think that's helpful. Yeah.
Would you like me to stick around to give?
It would be great
testimony?
if you'd prefer to do it remotely, that's fine too. But if you would stick around in some way, that would be terrific. Okay. Mr. Francis, are you all speaking from one voice on this, or?
Yes.
You are, pretty much. Okay,
Good afternoon.
great, thank you.
I'm Jeff Francis. I'm the Executive Director for the School Superintendent's Association. I'm joined by many of my colleagues, but two in particular, Sue Siglowski over here. She's with the VSBA, and Jay Nichols. I wanted to start by thanking you for the opportunity to testify and also make it clear from the outset that our associations support updating statutory requirements in order to address the important matter of improving the safety and security of Vermont schools. In other words,
I'm sorry, may I also just quickly ask, is the NEA, are you all together?
NEA
Yeah,
is
right.
not with us
Okay,
on this.
thank you,
They may be,
Yeah.
but we did not work with them.
appreciate it.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about the approach that we took. And it was an interesting process to watch because the administration came up with a proposal. They passed it to the General Assembly. Ms. St. James did drafting. We got involved when our association started to talk about the proposal that came from the administration. And in my case, on the day that you visited with us over at Capitol Plaza, we talked about this bill, and superintendents started to raise what I would say were subjective interests with regard to what they knew of how drills were conducted in schools presently. I took that under advisement and decided that these three associations that are represented by me and the Vermont NEA, along with Rob Evans, who's a school safety liaison, and in my case, Brooke Farrell Olson, who was a member of the Vermont School Safety Crisis Planning Team. She's the superintendent down in Fairhaven for the Slate Valley School District, should get together and talk about the legislation. We did that, and we came up with, I would not say major concerns, but some specific interests in the bill. After that meeting, we thought it was advisable to meet again with Mr. Evans and also with Emily Simmons, who's the general counsel for the Agency of Education, along with Sue Siglowski. And I point out at this point that Sue's an attorney, as is Emily Simmons, and we just talked about the bill. So we focused on the specificity of the bill in order to make sure that the language was right. And I would say that we were mildly disadvantaged in that process, because in talking with Emily Simmons, she participated in the conversation, but she said, with regard to anything that you see in the bill, it's really now in the hands of the General Assembly, because the administration had passed it off. And when we contacted Ms. St. James, who is always gracious in our communications with her, she didn't acknowledge whether she accepted our points or not, but said, really, now this is in the possession of the Senate Education Committee. So I'm not going to change a thing unless I'm directed to do so by the committee, and specifically the chair, which we understand the process. So what we have done in a series of meetings is take a look at the bill and utilizing our experience, and in Ms. Siglowski's case, her expertise, and we've made some observations and observations and suggestions. And I would say they range from the technical to the substantive. So as we work through that process, we decided one way to do it would be to give you a markup of your first draft of the bill and give you margin notes with the comments that we had. So whether you accept our recommendations or not, whether you find our points to have merit or not, you've got a document which lays it all out. So with your permission, what I'd like to do is just quickly go through these comments. And then at that completion, with your permission, Mr. Chair, if you'd let Sue or Jay comment on anything I missed, and then we'll respond to questions.
Sure.
Okay. So the first comment that we raised has already been addressed, and that was the statement of purpose. It wasn't consistent with what the bill actually did, and Ms. St. James corrected that, at least with respect to the form that the bill is currently in, your draft 2.1. Our second comment, and there are little lines that tie the comment to the place. We lost the line numbers, but the second comment just looks at the section that calls on supervisory union or supervisory district. And we're suggesting that be replaced with school district boards. And in the second comment, which is the second pink comment on the page, it shows that the school boards are the entity authorized by statute to adopt policies. So we think that where there's a policy adoption requirement, it should cite school board rather than supervisory union or supervisory district. The third comment, and I see the comments are enumerated, in our discussions with Rob Evans and Brooke Farrell Olson, it was determined that drills are and should be conducted according to written guidance. So we're recommending that the word template be stricken and replaced by guidance. And the reason is because the guidance that school districts get really go to the frequency and nature of the drill, which is different than a template. A template is a plan that one would follow. And you'll see that as we go through the draft, we do utilize the term template in the appropriate places, we think. So that was the third comment. The fourth comment, I would say, is very substantive. And that is, in my conversation with superintendents, and I know in Mr. Nichols' conversation with principals, and I know from listening to Mr. Tinney's testimony for the Vermont NEA, that we believe that the guidance for conducting options-based best practices have to be trauma-informed. And I did not include this in my testimony, but I'll give you the link to this. In preparing the testimony, I took a look at this document, which I found online, called Best Practice Considerations for Armed Assailant Drills in Schools. That's what option-based drills are. It just talks about how to conduct them in school settings with a lot of sensitivity to the people who are going to be participating, because they have the potential to invoke trauma. So I am far from an expert on that, but our collective review of the issue tells us that however guidance is issued under statutory requirements, the actual practice for the drills needs to be trauma informed. My belief is that because the Vermont School Safety Center is very school focused, understands that, and because the Vermont School Crisis Planning Team, which advises the Vermont School Safety Center, is comprised of school officials, that any guidance that was issued would be trauma informed, but it's an important enough point that we think it should be addressed in legislation. If you turn the page to the fifth comment, we did not understand why there wasn't a policy required for independent schools. And I listened to Ms. St. James differentiate between the requirement, at least it was as she was following up on the administration's proposal. There are places in law that independent schools are required to adopt policies. And this comment, which was put here by Ms. Siglowski, references a few of those places. So irrespective of the question, it seems like there needs to be resolution to whether the requirement will be for policies followed by procedures and practices or not. But that was something that we noticed. We didn't understand why there was a differentiation, particularly because in other places in statute, there is no differentiation. The sixth comment, I think, is also substantive, because the reference in the bill is to other educational institutions, and it references specifically, I'll say, the upper end of educational institutions in Vermont, universities or colleges, but it's silent on early childhood education centers. So we know that we know through the tragedy of what's transpired in this country that childcare settings in pre-Ks are susceptible to violent acts as well. So we weren't sure whether that consideration was given by the Agency of Education, but we think it's one that is a good question. Comment number 7 is explicit in that it requires school districts to have all hazards emergency operations plans, but there's no similar requirement for approved or recognized independent schools. When you consider what all hazards are, it's a comprehensive treatment that is intended to address, to put it in layperson's terms, all forms of hazards. And we wondered why. Well, we actually didn't wonder why. We thought it was an oversight.
Do you mind if I ask the administration right now? I think, was that an oversight, the independent school piece? Do you mind weighing in on that, or would you prefer to wait?
I prefer to wait.
Sure, absolutely.
But I'm leaning in that direction.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
so that was something that we noticed, that it was because I mean, if you consider any type of hazard, this event, it can happen at any place at any time. Our comment number 8 just indicates, it affirms the fact that the emergency operations plans should be driven by a template. So in contrast to the options-based drills. Number 9 is just a suggestion that we've made for clarity in terms of the way the collection of entities that are responsible. And in this case, access control and visitor management talks about not only school sites, but also supervisory union and supervisory district offices. So we wanted to make sure that the language at the top of that 1484A was consistent with that. Our comment 10 also asks why, if the public schools and school districts are required to have a policy, why the independent schools would only have procedures when we know that in some instances, the independent schools do have policies. Comment number 11. Let me just take a look at that. Oh, so in the draft of the bill, and this is also substantive, that came from the administration, there was very specific explanation of the composition of the school crisis, of the Vermont School Crisis Planning Team. And in particular, the behavioral threat assessment team. So when we delved into that, what we heard from school officials was that behavioral threat assessments are really situation-specific events in schools. And even if you've got an assemblage of people, you might not deploy all those people on a specific threat assessment. So because we're relying on guidance from the Vermont School Safety Center and the Vermont School Crisis Planning Team, we think that it would be sufficient to have the composition of the team laid out in the guidance, because the guidance should presumably not only talk about the composition of the team, but how you respond to different behavioral threats by deploying your assessment team. So it's a long-winded way of saying, we think rather than specify the composition of the team in law, we should rely on guidance from the expertise of the Vermont School Safety Center. And then finally, the last comment is on the very back page, and it's the 12th comment. And we didn't understand why, if sections, and this could just be a drafting aspect that we don't understand, if sections 1 and 3 are covered in B, and sections 2 and 4 are covered in C, why you would need A. And as is sometimes the case, and Sue, if the chair will allow it, I want to turn to you here. We had talked about the fact that school districts, and this is not in the comments, school districts would be hard pressed to adopt a policy on some of these matters by August 1, 2023, just based on the timing. So in the spirit of getting this legislation passed and cooperating with timely passage, I think we want to suggest that August 1, 2023 be changed to September 1, 2023. And it would be a logical question for you to ask, well, can these things still be put into place operationally? I think much of what is in this proposal could be acted upon by schools practically in terms of how they're going to go about it, particularly with regard to the access control. But it doesn't make sense to ask school districts to try to rush through their policy process if functionally it would be very challenging to complete by July 1, 2023. So I think we wanted to make a suggestion that be September 1, 2023.
Correct, in subsection D.
Right.
Yes.
And we did not have a note on that. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. So that's, thank you for allowing me to go through that.
Ms. St. James, do you see anything that's sort of outside of the policy decisions that you find objectionable or concerns with?
No.
No, okay,
And do you want me to explain the effective date?
please.
That's St. James Office of Legislative Counsel. Every section has to have an effective date.
Oh.
So the effective date section also needs to have an effective date. Usually you see that all incorporated where it says this whole act is effective on such and such a date. that effective date on July 1, 2023 could be folded into subsection B or C. But there wasn't direction on this, and just to be safe, making the effective date effective as soon as possible allows everything else to follow from it. So we can certainly change that depending on the committee's pleasure, but the effective date section needs an effective date.
I'm gonna make a note of that because I would not want to forget that little detail.
Right. I have to notice it.
So could everything,
Yeah, we have the McClure Foundation starting soon. Of course, this is an ongoing conversation, but yes, please introduce yourself.
Jay Nichols,
Yeah.
Executive Director of Vermont Principals Association. So could we just have everything start on September 1st, other than the July 1, 2024 piece, Beth, or does that take care of that?
It's a policy
Yeah, I was
question.
asking, was that okay?
Legally, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Please.
Let's note for the record that I didn't ask that question.
Committee, any pressing questions right now in terms of suggestions? I mean, they strike me all as logical. I think we need to hear now from the administration, which we will in the next few days. If that works for the administration, I want the NEA to come back in and sort of respond to some of this, but I appreciate your efforts on it.
Sure.
Yeah.
And if you'd like, I can send
I would
Hayden a link to
appreciate
this.
that. That
and
would
he
be
can
great.
Provide, it's
Yeah.
really very interesting.
That would be great. We might even have the author in, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it would, the sponsors are the National Association of School Psychologists.
Yeah.
And also the National Association of School Resource Officers. So I took note of it and learned more I learned more in the first 2 pages than I knew about the subject. So thank you.
And just as a reminder to everybody watching here or remotely, all of our bills have to make crossovers. So we really do we still have a considerable amount of time. We will make our way through this and our other bills, bit by bit, in order to make it to evacuation day, which is March 17th, also known as St. Patrick's Day.
Thank you.
Great.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank you both. Thank you all for your. Is it pronounced Weir?
Yes, it is.
Thank you, Ms. Weir. Please join us. I know we've said hello in the past. You've been before this committee. It's great to see you.
Good to see you as well. This is the first time I've been in the State House in person in a very long time. It
Yeah.
feels good.
Great.
So good to be here.
So the reason we asked you here is the McClure Foundation has made a tremendous gift, been incredibly generous to our community colleges. You have, without a doubt, changed the lives of a lot of kids. And it's, speaking for myself, but I think for everyone, it's greatly appreciated. And so I want to say thank you to the McClure Foundation, but I also thought it would be helpful to the committee to understand why you're doing this, why you've done it, where things are at, also know a little bit about the McClure Foundation and your work. So with that, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for the invitation. So for the record, my name is Carolyn Weir. I'm at the McClure Foundation. I serve as executive director. And I want to thank you for inviting me to testify. And thank you as well for the really meaningful investments that you all have made in the affordability of college and career training in recent years. We have seen such an astounding demand for the range of public investments on that front, everything from the critical occupation scholarships to the free course incentives to 802 opportunities. And the very first message I have is just celebrating all of the public and philanthropic investments in the affordability of college and career training in recent years. So for the benefit of committee members who may not be familiar with the McClure Foundation, we are a near 30-year affiliate of the Vermont Community Foundation. And we've spent the past 15 years exclusively focused on building pathways to Vermont's most promising jobs. Our grant making supports the viability and the sustainability of Vermont's public college and career training systems. And our grant making makes the Vermont-based education and training programs that lead to Vermont's most promising jobs more visible, more accessible, more affordable. Some of you may know us from the actual list of Vermont's most promising jobs. This is an 8-year partnership that we have running with the Vermont Department of Labor. I'll pass some of these out. We update this list every 2 years in partnership with the ELMI team at the Department of Labor. And taking a look
I have
at,
one more.
yes,
Put
please.
one on the file.
Good.
Yeah.
Taking a look at your agenda for later this afternoon, it might
Yeah.
interest the committee to point out that the new data points to public school teachers as the promising job that pays above the state median wage associated with the greatest number of projected openings over the next 10 years.
And if I may say something about that while you're on the topic, the reason we're having VSAC back in is we've been trying to pull apart, what do the numbers actually look like if you arrive here or you're here already, a recent graduate from a Vermont institution, ready to teach school. And something that I pulled apart over the weekend a little bit was in terms of state dollars, it's zero. It's all federal. Like if this works out, you can, but in terms of our state investment, in terms, with helping teachers transition into this state or reduce their student debt, and I think Marilyn's going to confirm this afternoon, we're not doing anything. And as we start to look at attracting teachers through our Vermont campaign for, to teach in Vermont, are there things that we can do?
Thank you for the inquiry. I'm thrilled to hear it. We are in many ways what I'd call a pathways agnostic career pathways and workforce development funder, informed by this broad list of jobs. But the specific question about the role for both philanthropic and public funding in supporting the development of Vermont's teacher workforce is of real interest to us right now as well.
Senator Kula.
Oh, sorry, no,
Oh, okay.
no, sorry.
So I'll just mention that we have, our grant making really does aim to strengthen Vermont's public college and career training systems. And we recently pledged a minimum of $5 million in grants over 5 years toward that end. And much of that is centered with the Community College of Vermont and the students they serve. So that's really what I'm here to talk about today. Why CCV is our cornerstone partner, what we're doing to support CCV and its students, and what impacts and insights are being generated through that support that may be of interest to you in this committee. So we zeroed in on our mission about 15 years ago when we became concerned about how few high school graduates are being supported to continue on directly to college and career training. You've all seen that data. The latest version of the data offers continued cause for concern. So 2 weeks ago, the New England Secondary Schools Consortium came out with the latest data on post-secondary continuation rates, and both in the aggregate and disaggregated by gender, race, income status, disability status, Vermont is still the lowest in New England. Fewer than half of all Vermont high school students right now are transitioning directly to college. Fewer than a third of their low-income peers are doing the same.
Which I should just to add also, it is, historically, it's a bragging point that we have a high graduation rate, but after that, it really does drop off in terms of what people pursue.
Yes, and we connect that longstanding trend to the fact that Vermont also has, I think, the highest poverty rate among young adults in New England, and obviously at a time when there are great jobs available, but folks without the skills and credentials those jobs require. So
Sorry for clarification. I think I missed what you said about the third. I got the half. What was the third?
it's about a third of students from low-income backgrounds who are graduating from high school and continuing directly on to college.
And then the amount of folks who graduate from college is also troubling, but that's a whole other topic. Yeah.
You can finish that whole thing out, finish it out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they don't graduate.
Yeah.
So we're committed to this work because we really do believe that affordable college and career training options delivered at scale is the single greatest lever for driving economic mobility and workforce development. That's our primary entry point for all of this work. And that belief really points us to a clear institutional partner for our grant making, and that's the Community College of Vermont. For good reason, right? Nationally, community colleges are engines of economic mobility. So too is CCV. It's our state's access institution, and it's our state's gateway institution. CCV serves the greatest number of Vermonters and the greatest number of low-income Vermonters of any college in the state. And from what I've read, the majority of students who benefited from public scholarship and free tuition opportunities that were publicly funded actually enrolled at CCV during the pandemic. So all to say, we think that institutional partner matters. If you're aware or have any background on our support for CCV, you most likely know about one or both of our 2 public pandemic era commitments. The first was our graduation gift to the entire Vermont high school class of 2020 of one free course of their choosing at CCV. I testified to this committee back in 2021 about the impacts and insights generated by that promise. It essentially doubled the number of recently graduated high school students enrolled at community college at a time when nationally new enrollment at community college is plummeting by double digits. So that commitment taught us a lot. It taught us about the value of hope and simplicity as design values, kind of big plays that are intended to inspire enrollment. It taught us about the importance of the right institutional partner, right? CCV was ready to serve, and we went from idea to launch with the governor in, I think, 10 days. And also about the necessity of support beyond tuition. Not only institutional support for enhanced student services, but also institutional support to promote and administer and evaluate the initiative. So those lessons layered onto essentially a decade of lessons that we have picked up from supporting the equitable and meaningful implementation of the Flexible Pathways Bill, Act 77 from 2013, led us to our second commitment. And I think that's what I'm really here to talk about today. So last April, we announced a promise to the entire Vermont high school classes of 2023, 2024, 2025, and 2026 of a free degree at CCV, any degree program of their choosing, through the state's early college program. So you all know the state's early college program is part of the Flexible Pathways Bill that allows high school seniors the opportunity to enroll in a full 3 years worth of college courses in lieu of their traditional senior year of high school. We made this promise because we believe young people in Vermont deserve affordable pathways to college degrees and deserve to be able to count on those pathways early enough in high school to be able to plan. Our free degree promise through early college basically says for everyone who completes early college at CCV and is interested in continuing at CCV towards an associate degree, we've got your second year, along with living stipends each semester and enhanced academic and career advising.
So to be
really
clear, let me just, so you do your senior year through CCV, all the classes, and then your commitment is to do year 2.
Exactly.
Wow.
Also known as like year 13, right?
Yeah.
So what that essentially means is a pathway to a free, fast-tracked associate degree through a state program, through the state's early college program, in any degree pathway offered at CCV that students choose. So I'm really excited to tell you a little bit more about the early impacts and insights of this promise, right? We launched in April, and now the first early college cohort at CCV that enrolled with the benefit of knowing that they could count on a free degree at the end of their early college year is currently taking courses and being supported by CCV. But before I get to that, I wanted to note that the 2 public commitments to CCV from the McClure Foundation that I've mentioned today, so our grad gift to the class of 2020 and the free degree promise through early college, are complemented by over a decade of more behind the scenes institutional supports to CCV. And that ranges from secondary education programming, support that resources the middle school access days and introduction to college and careers that President Judy mentioned in this room 2 weeks ago, to educational advising and courses delivered at Northern State Correctional Facility that I love this story because it helped pave the way for CCV securing 2 federal investments to scale incarcerated community college here in Vermont. I think it's a nice example of philanthropy assuming early stage risk and giving a trusted partner room to test and learn and build confidence in public partners to scale an idea or a program. We've also provided long-time support for veteran and military-connected student services at CCV, and things like enhancing career learning opportunities for CCV students in ways that align with the guided pathways best practices for community college delivery nationally. And in all of that work, CCV has really proven themselves to be an institutional partner that is responsive and creative and just ready to serve. So I will turn to the early impacts and insights generated by our free degree promise. We have a handout that I think you also have access to. But if you'd like another, if you'd like another copy, it's here. So So I've already explained the structure of the 3-degree promise. I want to spend a moment on why we made this promise and what we're starting to see in terms of the early impacts and what we're starting to learn from it. So the why here is, I've already mentioned, it's hope. Young people deserve to feel hopeful about their futures in Vermont and pathways to affordable degrees. And also opportunity, right? Community colleges really are engines of economic mobility. And so to center a universal college degree program at our state's access institution, our state's gateway institution makes sense. And Vermont's future, right? These are fast-tracked pathways to affordable degrees. We see that as good for the students who can benefit from the pathway, but also good for Vermont at a time when promising jobs are waiting to be filled. We really believe that the state's early college program, which we see as underutilized, has potential to lead to a highly supportive 3-degree pathway. Okay, so we're starting to see enrollment patterns at the early college program at CCV shift for the better. CCV is currently serving its largest early college cohort since the program was launched in 2014. The cohort represents about 90% of Vermont's high schools, which we're really excited to see. About 42% of that cohort are identified as low income by their school counselor. And the headline for me is that that represents a really significant increase in the percentage of the early college cohort at CCV that identifies as low income. Our North Star goals here, even though the program is designed to be universal access, is that the students who stand to benefit the most, students who have historic and economic barriers to attaining a degree, are the ones who are most supported to access and succeed in this pathway. We're also seeing that the percentage of first-generation students, the percentage of students who identify as BIPOC are higher than the K-12 population. And we have the benefit of learning through the enrollment process that 65% of this cohort intend to continue at CCV after their early college year. And that's more than double the percent of early college completers at CCV who typically persist at CCV towards their associate degree. So that's a pretty big shift. We're hopeful that means more young people who are choosing to stay in Vermont because they're hopeful about their futures here, and more young people with a credential that they can put to use quickly in the job market.
Senator Good.
I just wanted to add one thing I don't think is on this sheet. It's an observation that I made when I was teaching high school, which is folks have heard me say that our educational model is very much based on sort of a industrial revolutionary model or system, and it doesn't have a lot of flexibility, but the early college really speaks to those kids who are kind of ready after 3 years to be done with high school and move on to something else. And it just filled such a nice niche for those kids. Other kids need 5 or 6 years, but there are those who are ready to be out sooner. And I love that about this program.
Thank you for saying that. We really support the spirit and intent of the Flexible Pathways Bill, right? Passed by this body in 2013 that I think reflects that understanding really well in articulating such a wide range of flexible pathways to and through high school graduation. Now, I won't sit here and pretend that we think that early college is the right pathway for all students. I do think it's underutilized relative to the number of students for whom it is a great choice, and especially among low-income students, BIPOC students, young men, students with disability. Because we do know that there are a number of high school seniors who are checked out, who are disengaged, who are ready for the next step, and who are really hungry for their next step. And if we can make that next step clear and supportive for them, I think that serves them and it serves Vermont.
Can you give us a sense of the dollars that this investment is costing the Clear Foundation?
You know, this is a learn as we go.
Yeah.
From our perspective, a promise is a promise. So no matter how many students enroll, we are committed to covering that second year. There is a fixed cost associated with administration, promotion, and evaluation of the initiative and building CCV's capacity to support this special population of 18-year-olds, in some cases even 17-year-olds, right? So that's at about $150,000 a year on top of our 6 figures of ongoing institutional support to CCV for a range of student services and capacity needs. The costs associated with tuition stipends really depends on enrollment, and we just don't know yet.
And just to follow up, any geographic area you feel as though you might not be getting the students, this might be more of a question for CCB, but getting, as many Rutland people as Burlington, as Bennington, do you have a sense of that?
We're really curious about that as well, and we
Okay.
don't have a strong sense of
Okay,
it
sure,
yet.
yeah.
We just know that the cohort is quite dispersed, right? So 90% of Vermont high schools. I have to imagine that there's some regional gaps in representation that we need to be attuned to. And what that dispersed cohort also means, and we're hearing this directly from students, CCV has actually stipended a lot of feedback sessions with current students about what their experience is like and what they need so that we can adapt the pathway supports as we go. And what they're hearing loud and clearly from students is we crave a stronger sense of belonging among this cohort. A lot of students are taking classes online, and that's a good thing because it means the classes are accessible, but they're hungry for more in-person events, and that's what CCV is doing right now, creating dedicated space for these students at large locations and creating kind of social meet and greets with staff. I'll just mention briefly 3 factors that we think are contributing to the early success of this free degree promise through the state's early college program. The first is a commitment to universal access. We designed this promise to be universal because we want it to reduce the stigma of students enrolling who actually do stand to benefit the most from a free degree. And that is both an important and in some ways counterintuitive design component and choice. The second, and I mentioned this already, is support beyond tuition. We are providing living stipends and enhanced advising to students and directly resourcing CCB to deliver on this pathway and this promise. And the third is leveraging public funding. This goes back to you all with the gratitude that I started with. This promise builds on the state's early college program, which has been helping students get a jump start on their college pathways since 2014, and on recent investments in the affordability of community college, like the 802 Opportunity Grant. So my message to you all today is early signs are encouraging. We still have some time left. This was a 5-year promise, and our commitment to all of our partners, including you all, is that we are going to evaluate how this is going and share what we're learning along the way. We're also working very closely with CCB to make sure that current students are supported. Maybe I'll end it at that and see if you have any questions.
Any questions from Ms. Weir? Please.
So phenomenal program, but a curiosity question. It appears that one of the goals is that the students end up with an associate's degree. Looking through the most promising jobs, there's only 2 categories that even have an associate's related to it. And so my question is, it's a strategic one from your perspective. What led to the decision to support associate's degrees versus CTE type or certificate-based qualifications, so that the direction is more towards the trades versus university? I'm just wondering.
I love the question. So it's maybe a 2 or 3-part answer. The first is that we are not a college for all funder. Part of the reason that CCB is our cornerstone institutional partner is that they offer 21 certificate programs, and their certificate programs are what we consider quality. High quality when it comes to the kind of Wild West landscape of non-degree credentials, in the sense that they are accessible, affordable, oftentimes nested within degree programs. So completers with those certificates can use those courses and credits and count them towards a degree later on if that's what they choose. And we also know that CCB, like many community colleges, really are designed to be gateway institutions. So CCB courses and degrees are easy to transfer. So a lot of the folks that we imagine are pursuing a free associate degree through this program are planning to pursue a bachelor's degree and know that their first 2 years are free, and they have an interim credential along that pathway. I will also say one of the interesting things we learned during the pandemic was that I think there is a strong interest on the part of Vermonters, especially incumbent workers, to pursuing high quality, non-degree credentials. When we launched the Vermont's Most Promising Jobs brochure back in the update in fall 2020, it was a time of extreme labor market disruption, right? People were feeling really unsafe or insecure in their jobs. A lot of folks were out of work, and it honestly didn't feel quite as actionable to come out with a list of 50 to 60 high wage, high demand occupations like we usually do. So we paired that data update with a list of 7 short-term career training programs that we considered at the time best bets for Vermonters landing a promising job in 2021. It was a new piece of work for us. It was done very collaboratively with a wide range of workforce development partners around the state. And the Community Foundation actually kicked in $350,000 into scholarships for those best bet career training programs and capacity investments to the programs themselves. So for example, contributing to the nurse training program at NVU Linden. As I understand it, that short list of 7 programs was one of the inputs for what became the much more comprehensive list of critical occupation scholarships. And I've been thrilled to see the state support the affordability of these non-degree credentials, many of which are conferred by institutions that can nest those non-degree credentials into degree pathways.
Ms. Weir, I think we're going to have to leave it there. I really appreciate it. We know how to contact you if you have follow-up questions. We have follow-up questions. Can't thank you enough for everything that the McClure Foundation is doing. And I'm sure we will be back in contact as we make our way through some of these needs, such as teachers, see if there might be additional ways, if I dare ask, to partner.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you. Professor Feldman, how are you? Math expert, tax expert.
I'm good. How are you?
Good. But back to taxes for a few minutes, right? Jake, thanks for joining us. Mr. Feldman actually saw that we were talking about this conversation and having the conversation around comparing Vermont property taxes to peer states, and was kind enough to reach out to me and say, hey, I have some data on this. I have something. So I really appreciate you coming in. Do you mind just walking us through this? Sure. The document and then taking perhaps some questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks.
Jake Feldman, Tax Department. And there is a,
You have it right there.
oh, you have it right there, great. It's also under my name on your website. So this question has come up a lot at the Tax Department. I think it first came up, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. A former commissioner was wondering, well, are Vermont's property taxes high? That was the question. And of course, in Vermont, you have education property taxes and you also have municipal property taxes on the bill. Generally, municipal taxes are about 1/3 of education taxes, but you know, there's lots of personality in this state and those proportions vary quite a bit. This is a difficult thing to do. Julia Richter from the Joint Fiscal Office was here about a week ago, and when you asked her, and she said, well, it's very difficult to compare, and it is, because there's such a wide range of property tax formats in different states, and there's also a really wide range of relief programs available. So we tried to just take a manageable group of states to look at. We looked at New England states plus New York, and we used census data to try to get a sense of you know, how sort of average, or in this case it would be median, because it's, you know, this data you would use median as a measure of central tendency, but we looked at how median effective tax rates compare, where your effective tax rate is your total property taxes paid divided by your property value. And this data is coming from the census. So there's a table that looks like this, and I can walk you through that a little bit. The big green bar, the wide green bar, is to show that there's a range depending on what county you're in a state. Vermont doesn't have county level taxes. A lot of other states do. But Vermont, the census does break it down by county. And so depending on which county you're in, your taxes could be higher or lower. And if you look at Vermont, we actually have a pretty tight range, which is a reflection of Act 60. Because before Act 60, the amount that you could raise for your schools was dependent on the value of the grand list in your town. But Act 60 disassociated that. So it doesn't matter how much grand list you have in your town, it's what you spend per pupil that decides your tax rate. So before Act 60, there was a pretty wide range of education tax rates, and that tightened up quite a bit since after Act 60. Apparently, Grand Isle in Vermont has the lowest effective tax rate, on average, and this is very rough, but on average, and then Rutland actually has the highest. So not to say that taxes are the highest in Rutland County, but if you take taxes divided by average property value, that's how you get that 2.13% in Rutland. So those are some key takeaways from that bar chart. Other important things are that it looks like Connecticut and New Hampshire maybe have a little bit higher property taxes than Vermont, according to this data. And a key consideration here is that the census is not digging into the different types of credits and exemptions that are available, but Vermont has a unique system where your property tax credit is applied to your bill. It's also large. It can be quite large in Vermont, up to $8,000. So Vermont's data here reflects after the property tax adjustment known as income sensitivity. So I would say that after income sensitivity, Vermont is sort of not that high for property taxes. It's a little bit higher in this group, but without income sensitivity, I think it would be further out than it is. It might be higher than Connecticut and New Hampshire. And then related to the point about property tax credits, we constructed a table so that someone could easily compare the different circuit breakers or relief programs that are available in New England and New York. As I mentioned, Vermont's is kind of unique because it goes up to $8,000. Other states don't normally go that high. And then our credit is also unique because it gets applied to the property tax bill. Other states, it's generally a tax credit where you go in the spring to file your income taxes, you fill out a form, and it sort of gets blended in with the rest of your return. So ours is unique for those two reasons. It's somewhat unique because it's very expansive. It covers up to $140,000 of household income. Usually circuit breakers or income-based relief don't go that high. 2/3 of the homesteads, which is like a declared residence homeowner, 2/3 of homesteads get an income-based credit on their bill, which is also fairly unusual. And that's just about it for those graphics.
Any questions or comments from Mr. Feldman? I really appreciate you recognizing that we were having this conversation. And it's certainly something, I don't know about all of you, but constituents talk about. It's good for us to have some info, which to answer questions or build additional conversations. Senator Goulart.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if you'll be able to answer this, and it's maybe a really silly question, but looking at Massachusetts, a state that has, is often rated as having the #1 public school system in the country and lots of social programs. I'm just wondering how is it that their taxes seem lower than ours, generally speaking?
I'm not totally sure, but these tax rates are effective tax rates where you take the taxes divided by property
Right.
value. It could be the case that in Massachusetts, the property values are quite a bit higher.
That's true, yeah.
So maybe people are paying like sort of similar tax amounts, but on, their property values are maybe
Huh.
quite a bit
They
higher.
also have economies of scale that we don't have, so I get that point too, but just still pretty surprising, I guess. Well,
Any other questions or observations for Mr. Feldman? Jake, thanks again. This is really helpful. Did you follow?
No,
Yeah.
just giving it a thumbs up.
Okay, yeah. So once you get the thumbs up, then the committee usually is finished. So. Thank you.
Well, thanks for
Really
having me.
appreciate it. Let's take a 5-minute break and come back, and we'll hear from Dr. Boucher